Hey everybody, it's Ben and Beta, and today I wanted to do a video on 6 detailing mistakes that DIYers make and how you might be able to avoid those in the future. I've made no bones about it on my channel. I make mistakes all the time, and if I was doing a video on all the mistakes I've made DIY detailing, this thing would be like 5 hours long. We don't want it to be that long, so I just chose 6 things that I think DIYers get wrong or make mistakes on, and I want to help you not make those mistakes going forward. So the first mistake is not learning proper technique. I was a coach for 20 years, and what I focused on when I was coaching athletes was technique. If you get the technique right, we can then expand upon that. And that's something I didn't apply to DIY detailing. So I think it's super important that you take the time and effort to get your technique right. Now, in many instances, technique may not matter as much. If you're just washing your vehicle every week with whatever chemicals that you've gotten from your local store, you can make mistakes and it's not going to be a big deal. But there are a couple areas that a lot of DIY detailers are getting into today that are really important to get right, and that would be polishing and also ceramic coatings. And the reason for that is us DIYers, we're maybe only doing one vehicle, maybe 2, maybe 3 max. And then you're not doing it again for several years till you get a new vehicle. Whereas a professional is going to be doing it several times a year at the minimum, if not more often. And I know the first time I applied a ceramic coating back in 2019, I was very nervous about it and super worried about whether or not it was going to go well, but I did learn some things from that experience. So it is important, if you're going to do something for the first time like that and maybe never do it again or not do it again for several months, try to perfect your technique as best as possible. So here are a couple tips for that. Number 1, if you have multiple vehicles, and let's just say your wife's vehicle is something she doesn't care as much about, but your vehicle is something you do, polish, ceramic coat it, take care of that one first, learn your lessons there, and then apply those to your vehicle. If you're like me, I only have one vehicle right now, so it's kind of a one and done kind of deal. So there's a couple of tips for you here. It's important to choose the right tools, and that is something you can watch videos for. You can go on to forums and find some information. But make sure you're using the right tools for that job. So whether that's a DA polisher and the right kind of pad or the right kind of polish or a specific ceramic coating, make sure you know something about that before you go and apply it. Watch some videos to get some information on it before you start. But even more important with that is making sure you have chosen the right product for you. There are lots of great ceramic coatings out there that probably should only be applied by professionals. And if you purchase one of those and try to apply it, it's probably not going to go too well if you've never done it before. So try to choose something that's going to be within your experience level. And I'll give you an example of that. The first coating I ever applied was a glass parency coating, and I actually had to apply 2 layers in that to get the full protection. In the end, I was left with a few high spots because I wasn't exactly sure how things should work, how long should it cure, all that kind of stuff. Fast forward to today, there's a ton of new products on the market that are made for people with no experience to basically be very forgiving and still give you really great performance. It's really important to match the coating with your experience level. Things like the DIYDetail coatings, glass parency is actually not too bad for a beginner, but DIYDetail is even easier. The new Clean by Pan ceramics are supposed to be very easy to apply. So just doing a little bit of research around that, finding something that's at your experience level is important. Now, on to technique. If you're gonna buy a specific coating from a specific brand, you should buy their other products when you're going to be doing a coating. For example, if you were going to apply a DIYDetail coating, you're probably going to want to pick up the other DIYDetail products to go with that, especially if it's your first time. If you know what you're doing, maybe you'll pick up some other ones, but things, especially like the panel prep, make a big difference. This panel prep is formulated to work with the DIYDetail coating, same with most of the other products on the market. So those two you definitely want to pair together, but you might also want to do the same thing with the iron remover and maybe even the polish. If you keep it within the same house, it'll just make things easier for you. And then you can apply the techniques that that company recommends and know that you should have a pretty good result at the end. So that's one thing I'd recommend. The second thing is there are different techniques for applying a ceramic coating. For example, the DIYDetail one comes with this applicator. It's a circle, and they recommend a box and then a circle fill-in pattern for the ceramic coating. That's how Ivan teaches it. And it works really well. I've done it, works great. Many of the other coatings are gonna come with an applicator like this. It's a square, and they'll recommend a crosshatch pattern where you kind of make a box and then go the opposite direction. And because of the way your brain works, using a rectangular or square pad for a crosshatch, it's probably gonna work better than a circular pad and vice versa because your brain sees the circle, it wants to create a circle. It's gonna be easier to do. It sounds weird, but it's a small thing. and just follow the directions of the coating manufacturer to get the best results. So if they recommend a crosshatch, go ahead and do that. If they recommend the circle method, go ahead and do that your first time. After you've gained experience with it, if you want to do circles, then do circles. But if you follow what the manufacturer suggests your first time, you'll probably have the best results. So those are a couple tips in that area. And the same goes for polishing. The next tip around these is if you only have one shot, like for a ceramic coating or you're going to polish for the first time, start on your roof. If you start on your roof, you can make some mistakes up there, learn how the ceramic coating goes on, or learn how much pressure or not pressure you should be using to get a good result with your polisher before you go to the parts that everybody's gonna see. Almost nobody's gonna see your roof unless you're driving a sports car or something like that. Most roofs these days are at least as tall as a person, so you're not gonna see that as much, especially if you're driving an SUV or a truck, and it gives you a little bit of grace. So you can make some mistakes up there, learn some of those lessons before you apply it to the parts that you're gonna look at every single day and everyone's gonna see. But the roof I found is a great place to start because it does help you with learning and making mistakes that you can then apply those learnings to later on. The other thing that goes along with this piece is patience. And when you're learning these techniques, take your time. It's okay. If you're gonna put a ceramic coating on, you better have the entire day set aside if it's your first time ever doing the entire process, or you need multiple days to complete it. It took me like 6 hours to complete the process, and don't forget there's setup and takedown time too. And the patience piece is really important because when you're not patient, things like this happen. So one area where patience was a problem for me was when I coated this wheel and then drove the truck out of the garage a little bit early, didn't let everything dry. What happened was there was still some iron remover and stuff on some different parts here, and that spilled over into the wheel itself, and so it's gonna leave this white mark here, which is unfortunate. I didn't wash them as well as I should have. I should have taken a little more time on this wheel specifically. So that's what happens when you're not patient. Now, from back here, you can't even see it, so it's not a big deal. Again, perfect is the enemy of good. That's really pretty good, and they're definitely very slick. But you can see where I did a better job on some of the other tires, that did not happen. So that's why I think it's really important to make sure that you take time and have patience, especially when things need a cure. Just let them do that. That's an easy one to say. It's harder to do sometimes when you really want to take some pictures or you need to get a YouTube video out, for example. But you can see if I waited just a little bit longer, I would have not had any issues with the coating on the wheels, and it would have looked good no matter what angle you looked at it from. But if Ivan ever sees that, he's gonna know that I made a mistake there for sure. So technique is important, and that's how you solve that problem. So another DIYer mistake that I think has been made a lot, and I've made myself, is not understanding the products that you might be purchasing in order to detail your vehicle. So I'll give you a couple examples. One is this IK foam sprayer. This is meant to try to give you really good foam. And there's another spray that looks just like this one, and people often make the mistake of purchasing the Multi-Pro, which is merely made for more of like a rinseless wash, that kind of thing. This is more made for foaming your vehicle if you don't have a foam cannon, or you're gonna be doing wheels and tires, that kind of thing. That's what this is made for. And so people make mistakes a lot buying the wrong version of this for what they're trying to do. I've tried to use this for rinseless, thinking it's gonna foam up really well, and that's not really what rinseless wash is for. So it's important to match your products together, the chemicals with the correct product that you're using. That's a big deal. Another mistake that I made as a DIYer was I purchased a cheap pressure washer, and there's nothing wrong with that, absolutely nothing wrong with it. But what I didn't know was there are a couple things that are not that expensive that would have made my experience a ton better. One would be quick connects. Being able to really quickly connect everything together just saves time as a DIYer because I have to take everything out and put it back, unlike a professional who just leaves it hooked up most of the time, most likely. Another one is a snubby gun. A snubby gun was really helpful in making it more comfortable to detail my vehicle and wash it, and I really appreciated that. I also didn't understand it at the time that the foam cannon that my pressure washer came with could be upgraded to something better either. And another one is a longer hose. So if you get only a 20-foot hose, it's not as much fun to try to wash your vehicle because you constantly have to be moving everything and there's cord everywhere. So the quick connects and the hose, those are two of your biggest ones. And then something like a stubby gun or an upgraded foam cannon will really help if you're doing full washes with your vehicle. If you're not gonna use all that kind of stuff, having a good foam sprayer or a rinseless sprayer can be really helpful in just making everything quicker, faster, easier, better as you're detailing your vehicle. So having an inexpensive pressure washer, there's nothing wrong with that. you're paying mostly for the pressure washer itself. It comes with all these accessories. Even my Active came with these pretty cheap accessories. So your experience can be upgraded through accessories, but only if you pay attention to the products you're purchasing. And this is because not all pressure washers are actually upgradable. Unfortunately, my friend Brian found this out this summer when he purchased a pressure washer from Amazon, assuming basically it could be upgraded like everything else. The unfortunate part was the high pressure hose had a special proprietary connector, and you couldn't use any other hose with it. So he was stuck with a 20-foot hose with that system. So the lesson to you is you don't have to spend a lot on a pressure washer and then build a system out, but make sure it is upgradable. The other part of that is Sunjoe and some companies have a different size connector for their hoses. They use a 14 millimeter instead of a 15 millimeter. And you need to understand that about your system. So when you buy your quick connects and whatnot, that you're buying the right size things and everything fits together. So knowing a little bit about the products you buy is important to make your experience better. So hopefully that helps you with some tips on how to find the best products for you as a DIYer as well. All right, another mistake that DIYers definitely make, including myself, is dilutions. Getting your dilutions right and using the right amount of product to do the job and not overusing products. That's really important. As an example, I've struggled a lot with getting my foamer to work exactly the way I want, and that's a lot to do with the dilutions. I've also way overused rinseless wash in almost every case. And when I do that, all I'm doing is just wasting product. Same thing with spraying directly onto a surface. And that goes back to technique, which we talked about before. Spraying onto your applicator pad will save you product and will often work as good or better than spraying it onto your surface, which might have too much product on and make it more difficult. So that's one tip there. But as far as getting dilutions right for other things, how might you do that? Whether that's a foam cannon or an IK foam sprayer, well, let's take a little bit of time and talk about some tips for that as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about dilutions. And if you're just filling up a foam cannon with your favorite shampoo, putting too much in probably isn't the biggest deal. It might be a little bit hard to rinse off or clean off. Not the end of the world. But with things like a rinseless wash, which are supposed to be diluted to 256 to 1, it might be a little bit more important that you get these right. So you keep the product for longer and you don't end up causing yourself more work to try to get it off in the end, since you're just using a towel. Another thing that's important is something like an all-purpose cleaner. When you get these in the bottles, they're already diluted, but when you buy them in the bigger gallons, this is where you would need to dilute it to the right amount. This is 15 to 1. It's already 15 to 1 inside here. So if you try to take this and put it into a foam sprayer, for example, it's not going to foam very well. And the reason for that is you're over diluting it. I made that mistake at one point as well. Now I've got a gallon that I can use, and this helps me get to the proper dilution levels, which is great. So some tips I have to get to the proper dilution levels. Number one, the bigger the batch you create, the easier it's going to be. For Rinseless, for example, we know we're going to do 1 ounce of this product for every 2 gallons. So if you have 4 gallons, it's 2 ounces. That's a really easy dilution to do with something like this or a shot glass or whatever. Makes it pretty easy to do. And the things that I saw in videos, but I didn't practice, didn't try, once it's diluted, I can take my sprayer and just fill it up from the bucket, and now I've got the right dilution. I don't have to do any work inside here, which is much more difficult at a smaller level when you're at 256 to 1. So that's a pretty big tip that I just didn't follow. I don't know why, but I'll be following it in the future for sure. And that tip will also work for something like a rinseless that you might want to use indoors. You can just fill this up after you filled up your bucket before you've done your wash, and you've got a nice clean wash inside here. But if you're going to do something like that, you should actually use distilled water. So let's talk a little bit about that as well. Distilled water is fairly inexpensive. You can get it at any grocery store. There's all kinds of chlorines and things like that in your water. They'll give you a much longer life on your solution that you've created if you use distilled water. So it's important that you do that for long term. If you were going to use it up like that day, it doesn't have to be distilled. That's totally fine. But if it's something you want to use over months, distilled water is the best way to go. Next, and my good friend Eileen kind of got me onto this, and that is this Pro Blend. And this thing is just something you stick into your chemical, and you're able to get exactly what you want out of it in either ounces or milliliters. This is a nifty tool to get exactly the right amount of product to be able to put into your water. I haven't tried this one yet, but it's definitely going to be what I'm going to be using for rinseless wash going forward. And I'm kind of excited to give this a try. The next thing that I would advocate for is, if you're not doing it in large quantities, switch from ounces to milliliters. Milliliters are much more accurate, and they're generally easier to measure as well. And one way you can measure those is a gram of water is 1 milliliter of water. And that is if it's perfectly clean and whatnot. But in general, a gram of water is a milliliter of water. So another thing you can pick up is something like this, which is a coffee scale. And the cool thing is, whatever thing you're gonna fill up, you put it on your coffee scale, you tear it out, and now when I put water in here, I know exactly how much water I'm starting with. So now I've got about 150 milliliters of water, all clean, which is 15:1. Now I can put 10 milliliters of my all clean in here, and I'll have exactly the right dilution. So milliliters for me are a little bit easier to work with. Now a coffee scale is not gonna work great for something that's on a big scale, but it can help you with some of these smaller things. So I definitely recommend, if you already have one, use it. If you don't, try to find one. I'll leave this one linked. I like this one a lot. It helps you become very precise in your measurements. Now it's a little bit different with chemicals because they may not weigh exactly the same per milliliter as water does, but you'll still be pretty close. The last tip I would give you is to try to find some of these gallon containers or reuse one that you already have if you're going to reuse the same product in it. But what this allows you to do then is take my gallon of distilled water, pour that in here, and if I want to do all clean for my foam cannon, for example, now I know exactly what to put in here. I know it's going to be a 15:1 mixture, and that makes it very easy to fill up the right amount of all clean. Inside here with distilled water, it's going to last for a while. I might put a little Incredible Suds in there because this is what I want to use in my foam cannon. And then next time it's time to fill my foam cannon, I just use this container to put that solution in. And I've probably got 2 or 3 uses out of this before I refill it again, which saves me time when it's time to do my wash. And it also ensures that everything is correct when I put it in here and I don't have to mess around with it. So those are a couple of tips on how you can get dilutions correct fairly easily and cheaply. All right, I hope those dilution tips were helpful for you. Please comment below if you have any other tips on how to dilute, or if there are other mistakes you think DIYers make that they could learn from so we can all learn together. One of the other things that I think DIYers miss out on is trying rinseless wash. I avoided rinseless wash for the longest time because I was worried it wasn't going to be good for my paint, or I just didn't know how it was going to work, so I was a little bit afraid of actually trying it. Since trying it, I like it a lot, and I will be continuing to use that quite often, especially now that I have some good techniques for dilution. So the tip here really is go out and get yourself a good rinseless product. There are lots of them on the market. Give them a try. Buy it in a small quantity, learn how to use it first, and then decide if you want to stick to that product or try different ones. And then make sure you have a good way to wash. And something like these foam sponges works really well, but you can use a lot of different media for rinseless, but these foam sponges work really well. And just like everything else, practice the technique over and over again until you get really good at it. One other way to learn good technique is to take video of yourself, even if you're not going to put it out on YouTube, and just look at what you did so you can review it and say, oh, I could have done better with this or with that. It's pretty easy. Have somebody film you, set up your phone on a tripod, and then you might be able to go back and look at some of the mistakes you've made too. So I think Rinseless is a great option for a lot of people. You should give it a try. All right, another big mistake that I made early on that I think a lot of DIYers also make is not understanding how to take care of your products very well, especially towels. So early on, I would buy towels, I would use them once and be like, oh, they're really dirty, I don't know how to get them clean, and I might throw them away, which is just wasting. You don't want to do that. The same thing goes for applicators. You apply a ceramic coating, and you say, oh, I can't use that again, and you toss it out. And you just end up kind of wasting an applicator that's still really good. That also goes for foam cannons and for your foam sprayers, just taking care of all this stuff and making sure that it's gonna last for you as long as possible. So here's a couple ways that you can do that. Number one, when you're done with your foam cannons or your foam sprayers, make sure you wash everything out, make sure you spray it out with clean water at the end, and clean everything out. Make sure you take everything apart. And with an IK foam sprayer, you do have to replace these little foam pieces every once in a while because they get clogged and they won't work as well. Now with things like towels, there are lots of different ways to take care of these. I've ended up going to P&S Rags to Riches, and since I've done this, this has been massively helpful for me. For example, if you use a drying aid like a ceramic spray and you use your towels on that, that ceramic is in your towels. And if you don't wash your towels properly, they're not going to dry properly in the future. And I was starting to have issues with that and didn't know why. I started seeing some videos about washing and taking care of your rags and towels, and this has really been a game changer. It's just important that you do clean your media when you're finished to make sure that it works best for you. The other thing is, if you can separate them by the type, for a DIYer, that is much more difficult though, because you end up doing a load of laundry with like 3 towels in it because you just have 3 glass towels or something. That's not going to work very well, but do your best to separate them when you can. And I like to air dry everything. That works pretty well for me. But soaking stuff is a big deal. So if you find that things are not performing correctly, soak them in something like a P&S or a mild laundry detergent or a rinseless wash, then wash them and that should get rid of all your problems. And that does work with even ceramic coatings. If you put this in right away, the surfactants in that Rinseless or in this will actually get rid of all that stuff off of your applicator so that you can use it again in the future. There may be some ceramics that are like kind of glassy on the outside that may not work as well, so just be aware of that. But for things like DIYDetail, that works really well. The other tip is when you do put these in a wash machine, try to use multiple rinses just to try to get everything out of the towels as much as possible. If you can do 3 or 4 rinse cycles, that is helpful. Does it feel like it's a little bit of a waste? Yes, but your towels will last a lot longer, and one of these towels can cost you $20. So if you can keep these working for longer, that's a good thing too. All right, so that brings us to mistake number 6 that DIY detailers make. And this is relying too much on YouTube videos. Not all YouTube channels are created equally, and most of those people have way more experience than you do. So you can gain knowledge from that experience, but YouTubers are generally out to make money, so that's important. And you're gonna have ones that are super negative about everything and are trying to destroy products. You're gonna have some people who are always positive about everything no matter what. And then you have people who are in between who are really trying to do a good job of giving you an accurate, this is my opinion of that. But it is, in the end, the opinion of that person. So having a little bit more information for people like yourself with your experience level is really important too. One of the mistakes I made was not utilizing great information sources like Facebook groups. There are a lot of good Facebook groups out there for beginner detailers. DIYDetail is a great Facebook group where people are treating people really well. And I was just worried that people wouldn't treat me well if I asked a question. Don't be afraid of that. Go out and seek that help and advice. There's a ton of people who have been through the things that you are about to go through or have been through, or if something's not working, that they can help you work through that. So you can gain knowledge through a Facebook group or a YouTube video, but in the end, you can't put a skill to use till you've actually done that thing. I've been working in education for 20 plus years, and that's the biggest lesson that I've learned is if you don't actually put a skill into practice, you can't learn. And you're gonna make mistakes doing that, and that is how you'll learn. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's totally cool. Hopefully some of these tips here today helped you to avoid some pitfalls, but you're still gonna make mistakes. And you know what? That's a good thing because that means you've learned something. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this video. I'd be really interested to know if it was helpful or not. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet either. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, live your life in beta, and we'll see you next time.